Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Australian Survivor Heroes vs. Villains after week 3. And this was another pretty chaotic week in terms of these rankings, but hopefully things will start to settle down as we are learning more about these players and what they're being set up for. But there are 18 players to rank here, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 18, we have the first boot from this week, and here we have Frasier, the victim of the craziest tribal in Survivor history, which it was a pretty good tribal. I mean, it did lead to some pretty good moments from George, although Frasier as the boot here was pretty underwhelming, as we know pretty much nothing about Frasier. I mean, he was there. I mean, he was part of Simon and Jordy's alliance, but aside from that, we didn't really get much from him. And it sort of makes sense why he goes out here. I mean, he does weaken Jordy to a degree, while still taking out a number from the Simon-Jordy alliance. But at the end of the day, Frasier himself had nothing to offer, so because of that, he is here at number 18. Now moving on to number 17, and we have the second boo from this week, but here we have Shawnee, and this was embarrassing. The fact that this is now the second time this season where my number one pick had a drastic drop-off from the previous week. Now, I will say that during our boot episode, there were some red flags, like the fact that she was talking so much about playing with honor and integrity, to where it didn't really feel that winner-y, the fact that she wasn't seeming to play that strategically. But even so, I was still convinced, based on like the content we got before, that she would probably last a bit longer than this. But it wasn't meant to be, and she was taken out largely to weaken Jerry here. And again, I'll own up to it, I made a mistake again. But hopefully now things will start to rectify themselves, especially as we are starting to get a clearer picture of who the contenders are. But as things stand, I made a mistake, and because of that, Shawnee is here at number 17. Now we're moving on to number 16, and we have the final boot from this week, but here we have Paige. And I actually thought Paige was going to be the boot in the previous episode where Shawnee went home, as there was this focus on her, like focusing so much on the fact that Shawnee threw the challenge, which again, like could have made sense from a gameplay perspective, even if Shawnee didn't come across as someone that did it on purpose. But I felt like based on the content that we got from episode 8, I actually thought she was going to be the boot here, but instead she was the boot in this episode, so I was one episode off, but close enough. But as for Paige, I felt pretty confident she was going to be the boot in this episode. She didn't really seem to be set up super well moving forward, and it just made sense for the Spice Girls to sit together, as I didn't feel like they would be picked off here. And I felt like Paige was the most logical boot from that group. So again, she was taken out. She isn't really much of a hero based on what we heard from her outside the show, but whatever. But again, she was the boot, so because of that, she is here at number 16. And with that, there are 15 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they are to win the game, based on their edit and current game position. But at number 15, we have the same person I had at the bottom of last week's ranking, but here we have David. And again, I will continue to put David at the bottom. He is by far the most purple person in the edit, and because of that, there isn't really much to say about him. Now granted, his edit isn't as negative as a lot of other people's, but still the fact that he has gotten no content through the first 9 episodes, or at least no meaningful content, is pretty much an indictment on his end. So because of that, he is here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14, and we have another player that I previously had at number 1, but I did bump them down last week, and they are still at the bottom. But here we have Simon, and I think it should be pretty clear at this point that Simon is being set up for a downfall here. Pretty much the first time that this new villains tribe goes to tribal. But even before that, I mean, it's not great that he survived that tribal, largely due to this dumb twist where they had individual immunity. As it wasn't for that twist, obviously Simon would probably have been idled out of the game, or at least have Jordy and Frasier flip to ensure that he was outright voted out. But instead, they had this twist. He ended up winning individual immunity, and while they made a meal out of it, he was still embarrassed by the end of it, where George pretty much tested him by getting him to play his idol on Stevie, only for him to not do so, but then Stevie ends up staying anyway, and then obviously Stevie ends up flipping over to the Spice Girls, so that's pretty bad there. And now on this new swap tribe, they have this whole point of him broing down with Sean and Sam and stuff like that, and obviously Jordy gets the dunk on him for that. But even Sean gets a dunk on him for that as well, where he says that he wants to remain OG strong, and he specifically says that he doesn't want Simon to worm his way into their alliance. So I feel like that's pretty bad. And obviously the idol as well. I feel like it's pretty clear where this is going, where he's gonna try to play his idol at the first tribal, probably to make a big move, but then just be, I guess, idled out, or at least find out that his idol is fake and in turn be voted out at that first opportunity. I think it's pretty clear where he is going, so because of that, I have him here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and we have another player that I think has no shot of winning the game, but I feel like they could make it a bit further in the game than Simon. But here we have Benjamin, and I think it's pretty clear that Benjamin has no shot of winning, as I feel like this was a pretty bad week for him, where in episode 8, he's obviously shown being at the bottom, and him sort of resonating with what Jerry said about laying out the hierarchy of the Heroes tribe. But even then, he is shown trying to pin the vote onto Paige, and while he is successfully able to save himself by obviously playing the idol on himself, he ends up not getting his way, and in turn Shawnee goes home, which isn't really explained, and I feel like him losing Shawnee wasn't great for his game either, as he's continued to be on the bottom while having fewer numbers that he could work with moving forward. And then he gets to the swap where he is shown trying to work with this new Heroes majority, even though it's pretty clear that he is at the bottom of that majority. He even says within the episode that they are at the bottom, yet they should just placate to them, which I feel like is not a very good look there. And then obviously he does end up placating to them, only for it to not matter after Jerry flips, causing Paige to go home, and now he is essentially in the minority, where he could very easily be picked off next. Now granted, I think there is a chance that he could be set up for a deeper run based on his content spike from this past week, but still the fact that he is shown not playing well, or at least not being shown to be on the right side of votes, is a pretty big knock against him, and because of that, he is here number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have two players in a row that I have consistently had back-to-back, and they are still back-to-back, but at number 12, I do have to go with Nina here, and I feel like she had a pretty bad episode 8, where she was obviously telling Shawnee that the women are meant to split the vote on Jerry in case Benjamin had an idol, and you would think based on that content that this would lead to Nina potentially flipping the vote, that she could pull in Shawnee and try to pull one over on the alpha males, but instead she decides to use this as a way of flipping the vote on Shawnee, which is a bit of a questionable move on Nina's end. I understand that she wants to keep around the alpha males, but I still feel like that was a bit underwhelming for how that content was implemented within the episode, and I feel like through that, Nina isn't being set up super well here. That and also her relative lack of content, I can't really have her any higher than number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have another person that I had next to Nina for a lot of the season, but here we have Flick. And Flick is in a pretty similar spot to Nina, where I feel like she's one of these returnee heroes that just hasn't gotten as much content. Now granted, I feel like Flick is a bit better off in the edit, as she did say that it doesn't really matter Shawnee through the challenge because they ultimately lost, even though she still votes out Shawnee anyway, so take that as you will. But I feel like that's not as actively bad as what Nina was shown, where it could have been shown as a way of her trying to flip the vote. But even beyond that, I feel like Flick has been shown to have better relationships with the alpha males, to where I feel like she's better positioned within that tribe compared to Nina is. And plus, she did get that content about keeping Haley around as a shield, so we'll have to see within this next week whether that really pays off or not. But I feel like for now, it just makes sense to have Flick above Nina, so because of that, she's here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and again, this person is maybe a bit too high, but here we have Matt. And really, the only reason Matt is even this high is, again, because of his premiere. If it wasn't for that, he would be probably lower on the list, probably right above Benjamin, if I'm being honest, as he's really been invisible in the edit up to this point. But I still can't shake the premiere and the fact that he got that content during that pivotal episode. And that's really what's keeping him this high on the list. But really, it's his lack of content everywhere else that's leaving him this low at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have a player that definitely has gotten a bit more content, but I feel like they're not being set up for a win. But here we have Sam. And Sam got some content this week. I mean, he was pretty involved during episode 8, where he was trying to make Jerry feel comfortable about targeting Benjamin. Although even then, it wasn't super effective at the end of the day, as Jerry still knows that he's at the bottom. And I feel like Sam is someone who has definitely gotten a lot of content and at points feels like a narrator for the season, but he isn't really being set up for a storyline, and I feel like he hasn't gotten entirely positive content either. He's just more of a consistent presence than anything else, so I can't really have him any higher because of that, but still, I feel like he is being set up for a deeper run, but I had to leave him here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and admittedly this person has been a bit quieter in the edit compared to Sam. However, I feel like this person is at least close to certain other people we'll be talking about soon. But here we have Liz. And I think Liz is a pretty weird case because even though she is one of the Spice Girls, she has gotten by far the least amount of content compared to them. And, some of that could be simply because she's the only newbie in that group, whereas Shawnee and George are inherently going to get more content due to their reputations. But it's still that association that leaves her a bit high on the list. Although even then, she is in a pretty bad position right now. She obviously has a pretty bad swap. And I feel like there is a chance she could be picked off at this next tribal if the villains end up going there. But even then, Shawnee got that confessional about how she's going to hand off the idol to her if she feels like she's in a bad spot. And obviously, even though she played an idol at the last tribal, she still has the other one. But is she really going to hand that off, considering that she knows it's supposed to be a secret idol? And as far as they know, they're not supposed to know about that second idol. Now, granted, if she's able to find, a new idol, there's a chance that this could be rectified. But it's still a weird spot for her to be in. So because of that, I have her here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7. And I'm sure this is a bit of a controversial opinion, but I am still sticking to my guns here. But here we have Sean. And really the main reason I have Sean this high is I do recognize that he is a major character on the season, and I think there is at least a sliver of a chance that he could actually win the game by the end of it, and that I could just be interpreting all of his content wrong. But I still feel like he is ultimately being set up for a downfall here. Now admittedly his episodes 7 and 8 were pretty quiet, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but then we get to the swap episode, which I feel like is not that good for him. I mean, his main content comes during the camp scene where he's talking about the fact that he wants to remain OG strong so that he can run the game with the people that he can trust, which is good and could mean that it's good content. But then look at the other people that are on the original Heroes. I mean, you have literally the people on his tribe. You have David and Sean, who he literally decided he couldn't tell about his idol because he wanted to be a villain for whatever reason. So that was a bit confusing. You also have Haley, who he explicitly says he wants to keep around as a shield. So again, he probably isn't going to work with her long term. And then there's also Nina, who, again, is kind of there. Could be an ally for him, but really she hasn't been too much of a focus. And then if we look on the heroes on the other tribe, we have Benjamin, who is someone who's clear at the bottom and is shown being a bit of a snake. You also have Jerry, who is someone who is actively flipped against the original heroes at this point, giving them potential leverage moving forward. And then you have Flick, who again is along with his plan to take Haley along as a shield before cutting her. And then there's Matt, who is there, again, could be an ally for him. But literally, I feel like this whole statement of him wanting to run the game with people that he can trust is undercut by content that came beforehand. Where, again, if we look at the actual people, they're not necessarily people that he fully trusts, per se. And even beyond that, he said that he wanted to play like a villain, only for him to say that he wants to play this honorable game where he wants to largely stick to his alliance, which consists of the original heroes. So I feel like there's a bit of contradiction going on that makes me less confident that he's going to win. And plus, I just feel more confident in other people, mainly people who are not within his power structure right now. And I feel like those people are poised to flip the game against him later on. So I can't really have Sean any higher because of those concerns that I have. But I still recognize that he is a major character on the season. And I do recognize there is a sliver of a chance that him wanting to play like a villain could ultimately pay off by the end. But as it stands, I have to leave him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and realistically this person's a bit too high based purely off their content, but I feel like they're not quite out of it either. But here we have Haley. Now I think this next week is going to be very pivotal for Haley, as obviously this is going to be the last full week before the merge, and with that, there comes the ultimate test. Is Sean going to flip against her right before the merge? If they do, then obviously that would cause Haley to be out of the game and for them to go a bit higher on the list. Sean and Flick, that is. However, if she's able to survive this, then I think that could set her up pretty well. Again, I feel like she's aligned pretty well with people on the other side, people she hasn't had a chance to work with yet. And I feel like if she's able to get to the merge with those people, I think she could easily wiggle her way through the game because of that. So I feel like there's that. Also, the people that are proclaiming to cut her right before the merge haven't exactly gotten the best edits in the world either. Again, Flick and Sean are a bit lower on this list. But again, if we're basing this purely off her content, I don't feel the best about Haley in the world, but it's still the chance that she can make the merge that leaves her here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I kind of can't believe this person is this high, but if we are basing this based on what we've seen so far, it kind of makes sense. But here we have Stevie, and Stevie is actually kind of being set up for a deep run here, I think, where obviously he was a pretty big focus during the craziest tribal ever, where obviously George was testing Simon to save Stevie using his idol, and then Simon literally decides to cut Stevie, only for Stevie to end up staying, and in turn becoming a new Spice Girl. And even got content in the following episode where he apologizes for ever doubting Shawnee and Liz, and he even starts crying over it, and pretty much announces his loyalty to their alliance, which in hindsight may be a bad sign in terms of him like working with Shawnee long term, considering his little plot at the beginning was to flip against Shawnee. But I feel like now he is now a member of this new alliance, and considering that, I guess as a bit of a spoiler, I consider this alliance to be the main characters of the season, I actually feel pretty good about Stevie's longevity within the game, and I feel like the edit has still given him some screen time because of it. Now, realistically, he's probably one of the less likely people to actually win the game from a pure game perspective compared to a lot of the other people we'll be talking about soon, but still, the fact that he has gotten this much content and the fact that he is shown to be in a pretty good spot at this point is enough to leave him here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have another player that I was a bit surprised that they're doing this well coming into the season, but it makes sense. But here we have Jerry. And believe it or not, I actually had Jerry at number 2 after episode 8, as I feel like he got pretty good content in episodes 7 and 8, where obviously he goes back to the Heroes Tribe. He literally breaks down the hierarchy on the Heroes Tribe, and while that could have been presented as a major negative, the fact that he's just revealing all this information, he does get a confessional talking about how he's not hero strong, he's Jerry strong, and that he's playing for himself. And even Benjamin, who gets a confessional talking about it as well, he says that it makes the heroes uncomfortable, but then it leads to him saying that he knows that he's at the bottom and that he needs to do a bit more, which leads to Benjamin looking for the idol. So I feel like that does prop up Jerry to a degree. And then in episode 8, again, like I never had any doubt that he was surviving the tribal, but obviously he loses Shawnee, who is one of his closest allies. And through that, I felt like he was being set up for a bigger storyline. I felt like this was going to be a key turning point for his edit, where obviously in episode 9, he would get this swap where he would end up on the new tribe with George, Shawnee, and Stevie, like the people he had literally aligned with at the Heroes Tribe. And through that, could have started to expand upon that, playing for himself. But I was actually a bit underwhelmed by his content during the swap episode, where I felt like he could have talked a lot more about the fact that he lost Shawnee and how he really needs to start playing for himself even more so, how this only confirmed to him what the hierarchy was. I feel like there was a lot he could have done here in terms of the pure situation that he found himself in. But instead, his only content comes during the scramble, where he does talk about being a swing vote. But even then, like, it was during the scramble, so it made it sound like maybe he could side with the heroes. But obviously, that wasn't going to happen. So it's not the worst edit in the world, but I feel like compared to what it could have been, with the amount of content that he was given that to work with his relationship with Shawnee, but also like the fact that he is now on the same tribe as the people that he wants to work with. The fact that he only gets content during the scramble is a bit of a knock in my view, and that did cause him to drop down a couple spots because of that. Now, again, he is still alive in the edit. He had, again, an introduction to the premiere, and he's gotten some good content since then that does leave him a bit higher on the list. But again, I feel like for this week, I did decide to bump him a bit lower, simply because of his lackluster swap episode. So because of that, he is here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we have one of these Spice Girls, but here we have George. And I actually had George a bit higher on my first draft of this power ranking. However, after thinking about it some more, he was kind of dunked in the edit during episode 8, where he obviously has this really big episode 7, where he obviously tests Simon and is able to make this really big show at this tribal, where he's able to effectively expose Jordy, but then also get Stevie on his side, and in turn, like, really expose Simon for being, like, not a very good player at the end of the day. Which, all of that was pretty fun, But then in episode 8, like, we hear, like, Jordy and Shawnee, like, talking pretty bad about George. The fact that George was being talked negatively about due to him, like, exposing Jordy and making him feel bad and just putting him in a pretty bad spot for seemingly no reason. I did decide to bump him down because of that. Now, granted, he did get a bit of a bounce back in episode 9, where he is shown reaffirming his commitment to the Spice Girls, but I feel like that knock is enough to leave him at number 3 here. Now moving on to number 2, and we have another Spice Girl, but here we have Shawnee. And I was actually considering putting Shawnee below George, as she has been a bit more quiet in the edit, and even through episode 7 she was pretty quiet there. And actually, the fact that she was pretty quiet during this crazy tribal was pretty bad. But then episode 8 kind of rectifies it, where she gets to talk about her relationship with Jordy, and in turn gets to throw George under the bus to a degree, like making him seem a bit more duplicitous. And the fact that George doesn't get to respond to this did make me put Shawnee a bit higher because of it. That, and also her getting a decent swap episode where she obviously finds another idol. She obviously talks about the potential of handing off one of her idols to Liz while still having a secret one. Is pretty good there. Now granted, she does ultimately play one of her idols for George at that tribal, so I'm a bit skeptical over where that's gonna go. Really, I think George and Shawnee are relatively close in my view, where I feel like they each had different pros and cons to their edit, and really I could see them going either way at this point, but I think this week was slightly better for Shawnee. And also, I don't have the same concerns with Shawnee compared to George being targeted due to his threat level, so because of that, I do have Shawnee at number 2. Okay, now it's time to be very careful here. I'm gonna be super duper careful here. At number 1, the person that I currently think is the most likely to win Australian Survivor Heroes vs. Villains is Jordy. And I did question Jordy to a degree. Obviously, his episode 7 wasn't that great, where he did get to talk about like how he's noticing cracks within, how like he is sort of playing this middle spot, only for all that to get blown up at Tribal, where George tells everyone, including Simon, that Jordy was the one to tell everyone about Simon's idol, and obviously that burns Simon to a degree there. And obviously, by the swap episode, we see Jordy ending up in a pretty bad spot where he is on the same tribe as Simon, but also a lot of the people that Simon is very desperate to work with. So from a pure gameplay perspective, like, things aren't super duper great for Jordy at the time being. However, I feel like the edit is really going out of its way to prop him up. I mean, he obviously got this fantastic content in episode 8, sort of this great bounce back after his lackluster episode 7, where he gets to respond to all the bad stuff that happened to him, where Shawnee gets to talk about wanting to work with him, that she feels bad that all that stuff happened to Jordy, and seems to blame George to a degree for doing this when it wasn't so necessary. He gets an intro package talking about how he left his wife in order to play the game, how he obviously turned his life around after the first time they played, how he met like the girl of his dreams, and the fact that he found out not too long ago that she's pregnant, and that he's giving up a lot to be here, and so he wants to ensure he leaves nothing on the table. Like, and then he goes on to say that with the tribe in chaos, like, that's where he thrives. And sure enough, he does, like, get to talk to Shawnee and Liz about the tribal and stuff like that. I feel like, on the whole, it was a pretty good episode for him. And then in episode 9, he obviously gets a bad swap, but even then, I feel like he still gets good content there, even though his tribe doesn't even go to tribal, where he gets this whole segment of him broing down to a degree, and makes it sound very methodical, like, and he even wraps it up by saying this is his best work, which through that not only shows his strategic acumen, but also undercuts Sean and his fellow allies there. So again, I feel like that only serves to benefit Sean's game. And I feel like moving forward, we even see Sean, even though he does talk about work being OG strong by the end of it, he talks specifically about Simon being so desperate to work with them, and that he can't allow Simon to get it within with him. But he says almost nothing about Jordy, and his whole line at the end about he wants to run the game with people he can trust does open it up for Jordy to squeeze his way in there. So I feel like on the whole, this was still a fantastic week for Jordy, and mixing that with his week 1 and week 2, I feel like he is, for me at least, the clearer contender to win at this point. Now, I have to add the caveat here. I had to remind you that in week 1, I said the same thing about Simon, immediately gets dunked in the edit, and I realized I made a mistake there. Week 2, I said a similar thing about Shawnee. She gets voted off this week. And now with Jordy, I'm sort of in a tough spot here, because I really think Jordy has the best case to win of the people still in the game at this point. But, like with my track record, I'm a bit hesitant to do so. But again, that's the nature of these videos. I have to make these calls. So I'm going to say it. I think Jordy has the best shot of winning right now. And because of that, he is here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, obviously, I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so stay tuned for that. Survivor 44 is starting in just a couple weeks, so you can stay tuned for content on that as well. Same thing with Big Brother Canada. That's also starting up soon, so you can expect content on that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join the Discord server, which I'll leave a link to join in the description. We're doing some fun stuff in there, like a draft game for Survivor 44, so be sure to get involved in the action there. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.